Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ahlan wa sahlan, a warm welcome to Muslima Insight. Back by popular demand due to the various requests from members from our respective communities, we thought it not only appropriate but absolutely necessary to recap a topic that we've touched in the beginning of the series, namely the effects of apartheid on our psyche. And with me in studio to share with us their experience, their knowledge and their insight on this very vast topic, I've got two ladies with us in studio. Assalamu and welcome Sister Suraya Bibi Khan, who is a activist as well as a mother, a wife, and a very active social person involved in community work, as well as Sister Sharmila Ghani, who is also an activist, very involved as well in community work, mother and wife. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to both of you. I really thank you for taking out the time and joining us here on set today. As I've mentioned, it is a topic that is very vast, yet it is very important that we try to do justice to this particular topic in this program, inshallah. And I would like to start off by asking if you both can share with us and the viewers, how did you come into being an activist, a political activist? What happened in your life that you became part of the struggle, and what role did you play in it? Sharmila.
Shukran, Adila. I'll start off by saying that I grew up in a township in the Western Cape, Cape Town in particular, where our parents were forcibly removed, particularly from District 6, but also in our community going to school as young children, and that is primary school and high school, we had to stare down the barrels of guns because people were protesting at the time. And that is how the involvement started from a young age, and to see the suffering of our communities. And the topic that we're going to speak on, various researches that has been done indicates the effects of forced removals and violence perpetrated by the then apartheid police upon young children and communities. And that's where it started from. I joined the Muslim Students Association, were recruited into the Muslim Students Association, and then into the bigger organizations that stemmed out of the Muslim Students Association. And Auntie Bibi will maybe mention those like the Call of Islam and those type of organizations. Then after that into formations where everybody came together into the UDF, including the labour movement, and then eventually into the current party that's leading our country, the ANC. But also as in my working days then, as a trade unionist, my mom was also in the factory. She worked in the factories and she belonged to the Garment Workers Union. So I don't know if it's an automatic progression from the parents that we had. I then became a trade unionist as well. Thereafter, I worked in the finance industry, being a gender activist in the trade union and leading negotiations in salaries and as well as the region. I then worked for the South African Communist Party on the transformation with other people in the party on the transformation of the financial sector. And that's just a brief background. Currently doing development work. We do funding through the labour federations for job creation, poor communities. We work around the country in the deepest of rural areas, in other rural areas. And that is briefly.
Wow, mashallah. That's really, you can see in what you've mentioned, there's a lifetime of very good experiences that we can learn from. Sister Suraya?
I think it starts up about the same thing, because it was Safaitan. It was the removals in Safaitan. I was very young at that stage. So didn't really understand until later years. When I got married and then I started looking back and understanding what it was that my father and my mum instilled in me. Because I grew up in Everton. And Everton, it hadn't the 61 that took place in Sharpeville was in later years. So Everton was this wonderful environment of being next to Goko and Mrs. Johnson and Mrs. Mulifi, and growing up with parents. Everyone was your parent. So you didn't understand, and I still do not understand, and I don't think I ever will understand racism. Not from an Islamic perspective, not ever, because I grew up in that free-spirited way. And my dad didn't have the BCom, so he came from the University of Life. But his wisdom was far-reaching. He instilled simple values. And my mum would be that mother that you can go and sit on her lap no matter how old you were. And didn't then have the opportunity, because of the forced removals and because of all that my dad and my mum had lost, one didn't have the opportunity to finish schooling, to do your matric and things like that. And I think for me, that has always spurred me on in relation to looking back all the time at Islam and taking from our Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So I don't feel in any way that it is a problem when it comes to the level of education. Of course, you do encourage your children to learn and study forward. But in that way, one then took it up when the children were of age of 2 or 3, my baby, and then went in fully into the what was then the UDF. Went to a meeting at the Ramakrishna Hall and heard this amazing person, Umbai's Nudia, standing there and talking about if he could die happy, knowing that some other person from his group, his race group, from Afrikaner background, would follow in his footsteps. He would feel he has done his work.
Sure.
That one person could take over from him. Then there's Murphy Marubi. The UDF, there were so many levels that you were involved at meetings and things like that, and that was my University of Life. That is where I learned about what really was done in the name of apartheid. And therefore, I can easily relate to Madiba and our leadership that followed, about the sense of forgiveness, the sense of healing, the sense of bringing people together. And that is Islam, So it brings that sense of togetherness. It was then where the UDF and the FETRO started, we got involved as women and wanted to change the world, and do things as women. And therefore, my sticking to my guns and working in the sector of women, mainly, gender issues, okay, here and there. So it would be the civic associations of Lenasia, it would be civic association of Johannesburg that became Sanko afterwards, FETRO that came about, Sawi. We started a women's empowerment group of Women's Institute for Leadership, Development and Democracy, and Umbay said, "Maar julle maak nou dit wille vrouens, How can you do this, wild woman?" We said, "Yeah, Umbay, but with a double D. Democracy and development goes together, So mine was always in the field of doing development work and wanting to change and transform because of the peaceful manner in which our country turned over from where it was. One holds on to that memory. And that's why the call of Islam was fundamental in the early 90s for me, because prior to that, I was UDF. I was very clear that I'm mixed. I can't stick to any one particular group if it's a race group. I want to work with everyone because we're all human beings that Allah Ta'ala created.
I can clearly see from what you both have said, the growing up during the apartheid regime, it has clearly shaped and formed where your life was going to lead. Plus the fact that you're obviously Muslim and Allah Ta'ala has chosen you for this path, because clearly you've played both a big role in where we are today, where we find ourselves as Muslims today. And what I would like to ask is, in your experience, looking at the effects of apartheid, what effect did it have on social cohesion?
I was checking it out this morning and realized the UDF was social cohesion. It was bringing together people from various backgrounds and groups. It was faith-based. It was businesses coming together. It was your unions. It was your workers, your layperson. It was across the board. So it brought everyone together on a common purpose. And that purpose was to rid our country of apartheid.
Sure. On that note, it is unfortunately time for us to take a short break. Hold that thought. We're back after the break. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. A warm welcome back to Muslima Insight. Today in Muslima Insight, we are once again recapping the topic, the effects of apartheid on our psyche. Before the break, we were looking at the question of how apartheid affected social cohesion. Sister Suraya, you were busy explaining to us and we had to go to ad break. Can you just recap for us?
I know, because the UDF started in the Western Cape. And the call of Islam was started in the Western Cape. The manner in which he started, I think Shamila would be best placed to explain on that. For us, when it came to Johannesburg, to what was called Transvaal then, to Gauteng now, the manner in which people rallied around, you would see the meetings and everybody was on a very high moral the moral high ground was with us. It was, apartheid was wrong for anybody.
Absolutely.
To have that sense of arrogance, of superiority, which is what it was, for my eie and for jou nie, kind of thing. So people rallied around that, and that was our strength. The social cohesion we need to build back into society now, because people have split up since apartheid. It was, it's no longer where we care for one another. There's a lot of selfishness that has come into society, if I may say that very bluntly. We're not as caring as what we were in those days.
Sure,
and
definitely.
It's as if when you struggle, you care more.
Yeah, it is. Shamila?
Yeah, I think there was more negative than what there was positive in the effects that apartheid had on social cohesion. What I can say, I don't know if you want to view it as a positive, but for us growing up as a Muslim family with the whole road, all the families in the road were Christian, but we grew up as brothers and sisters. And that was, amazing for us. And not only that, the support. We had to rely on each other for any little thing, be it illness, or the person across the road or next door didn't have a piece of bread, or you yourself didn't have a piece of bread. Your Christian neighbor would say, I can give you this because this is halal. You can't have that because that is not halal. And so be it with whatever celebration there was, and that was the social cohesion within those communities at the time, because we had to rely on each other. But not only that, they looked after each other. It was the adab and the akhlaq towards your
fellow human.
Exactly. And it was that they would look out for you, and if your parents weren't at home, they would tell your parents if you were naughty or if you were rude. And that was, I think, a little bit of the positive out of it. But the negative part of it was that you knew that you couldn't go across to the other side of the road because you were inferior. And that is the mindset that we need to deal with still, because there is still after effects of this. And, going forward, how are we going to build this social cohesion again? Because now we are an international community. And I think what had happened was that we weren't exposed to the outside. So post-1994, there was this big open world out there. And like Auntie Bibi said, it became about me and how I can achieve more and accumulate more. How can I be better than my neighbor, than being, help my neighbor to achieve what I am achieving, or my sister or my brother. That is all part, because what is the principles of social cohesion is a community with diverse backgrounds, but has got the same objective, because, and I'll go later through the principles of that, because ultimately we come from the same roots. Like Auntie Bibi said, we all come from the same creator, right? And also we belong to the community of mankind. So, and in the Quran, Allah states very clearly that you would want for yourself what you would want for your brother. But today what we see, and I don't know if it is, and even within violence, you know, it's effects of disorganization in the cohesion of communities. And therefore, and also the after effects of the amount of violence that was in those townships, in the schools, in your communities, because of people being broken apart. Because I remember when my parents, I wasn't born then, but when my parents moved into the area, the township that was established, when they were given homes to move out of District 6 to go and live in a township which was called Windermere at the time, it was a mixed community. But then some of those people were moved out to Gugulethu and to Langa, because, and that is how it was with the effects of apartheid, was that you don't belong together.
Would you say this relates to the social disintegration and the violence that then followed? Because obviously people were living in peace, in harmony next to each other, and apartheid came, and then this pulling apart happened.
Exactly, and that is the way of divide and rule. Because if you divide a united force, you can rule over them. And I think you can see it in the effects of what is happening in the world today as well. And that is what happened then. Because, you know, there was no differentiation when people lived together. We were from the same community, ultimately striving to survive, you know, through poverty and whatever, the working class and all of those things. And when people are segregated, say, you are better than the next person, you know, that will stick with you. And that's why I say, up until today, you can see some of the effects that it have, because you can hear comments being made also. And I was actually listening to interview this morning, and you know, my heart just went into my throat, because the person was saying, the lady that commented, phoned into the interview, said that, yeah, we mustn't make the Nasara and the Yahudi our friends, and they're against us. And subhanAllah, that is not what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has taught us. They're all creation of Allah. In each community, you get evil and you get good. But what we were taught was you look for the good in the person before you look for the bad in the person. And that is how we grew up, and that was principles that our parents had taught us. And, you know, this is what we are trying now to say, that we are one community. We come from different backgrounds, different cultures, different religions, but we are one. Because we live in one country. We don't know any other country. Our roots aren't anywhere else. And this is how we can build on social cohesion, because at the end of the day, everybody will benefit. It will also assist with the crime that is in our communities right now, because it's our children. It's nobody else's children. So we have to look inward before we look outward and then put the blame on other people.
And I think what is important for me today as we sit here is to validate what people lived through, because with that validation, healing can happen. For the simple fact just to be heard, this is what my parents went through. This is what I grew up with. And like you have touched on the racism aspect, the hurt that it causes, the arrogance from the other party to bring these aspects across. Sister Suraya, from your side?
You know, Shamila, as Shamila is talking, Adila, I'm reflecting a lot, because in the days when we were really struggling, and it wasn't easy, you were called names and you were worried at what time would you be picked up from work. At what stage are you involved with something that your partner that you're sleeping with doesn't know what you are involved in? Because you're doing things that, from a security point of view, you are placing other women's lives in danger. So I was in a precarious position with even my children, because my children didn't know. They didn't have much of a mother that would be normal in other people's lives. But you did it because there was such a great goal that you wanted to achieve. We take it so for granted when we say we have a democratic, non-racial, non-sexist South Africa. We are united in our diversity. That's the preamble in the Constitution. We fought hard for that. It wasn't easy. There were times when one was so angry that you would have done something, and then, the label that comes very easily in the international arena, especially to Muslims, is you terrorist, And I would say to some people, but, your terrorist might be my freedom fighter. Because the way we needed to look at things in South Africa. South Africa has set the standard for so much in the world on how it is not easy to bring about peace. It's easier to pick up that weapon and to get angry and to beat a woman. But on the whole, it takes much more out of you to be calm, to look at the process of what you can do to heal that person instead of aggravating the situation.
Absolutely. It is that matter of looking and acknowledging, who am I and what do I need to do to become a better person. Once again, it's time for us to go to an ad break. Don't go away. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. A warm welcome back to Muslima Insight. Auntie Suraya, before the break, we were touching on some of the effects that apartheid had on the social disintegration, the violence that followed. Can you just elaborate for us on what you were saying?
Shamila, if one looks at the point of the call of Islam, how it was established, in that broad social cohesion of everyone coming together to form the UDF. And then one takes it to an international level and say, what is the United Nations? The United Nations tries to bring that about. But you have bullies in there, as you have at any time in any situation. But people are coming to South Africa to find out, how did we deal with the whole question of what was on our statute books, what was practiced by law in this country, and yet in their countries it wasn't on their statute books. It's not in their law, but they practice it. Society practices it. So in that way, we are giving the lead in many ways.
Sure.
But it's so sad because we're such a young democracy to place such a heavy responsibility on us in South Africa.
I want to come in there, but surely Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in His wisdom chose South Africa for a purpose, for a reason. Because the question that I would like to ask you, in that being a Muslim, how did the Quran and being a Muslim come into play for you in this whole struggle? Because we survived it, and like you say, we are now the front runners, we are the leaders in this. What can we say to the people out there? What helped you through this whole process?
Attila, like I said, we came from humble beginnings, and my mum and dad were not so perhaps well versed in school, your secular education, but they knew Islam because it was oral, it was passed on. You learned how to read the Quran. You didn't understand what it's saying, but your essence of being a Muslim, you embraced the Quran. You embraced what was imparted to you in a way that you knew that it was, you stand up for truth, you stand up for justice.
Sure.
Call of Islam was established to stand for justice against oppression, even if it's our own, And in that way embodied a lot of what one could say is, every Muslim could say, yes, we identify We could identify with what was coming out. And it was a few of the brothers that took the role. They weren't well accepted in the broader Muslim community because there was that element of fear that you must obey, the law of the country and blah, blah, blah. And there was a contesting of views and opinions, which was healthy, because Allah Ta'ala gave us minds to think, man, not to be followers all the time. We should be leading and lead by example. If we really follow our Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, would any of the things that was being done in the name of apartheid would it have been accepted? No. Sure. We would have stood firm and said, and that's what we, alhamdulillah, then had a group of brothers from Cape Town coming to Transvaal and engaging, and that's how they spread it. But it was very small because people were scared. There was an element of fear, Shamila. Not many people. If we look at the population in those days, we were but 0.01% that participated as activists. You hear now how every person was involved in their small way in standing up and saying no, it's in themselves. In themselves saying this is not acceptable. Right. But really on the front line.
To be on grassroots level involved.
And being there on the front line when the police are chasing you and you are having to deal with situations. And you say to yourself, Allah Ta'ala strengthened us. Allah Ta'ala gave us so much strength to stand firm against that oppression, which was done in the name of a race. I'm a better, because that is what apartheid. The effects of apartheid, the mere fact that we now have to work so hard for people to be installed with a sense of dignity, of being a human being, and knowing that even if you're a beggar and you're there, that you are a human being.
You are worthy.
You are worthy as a human being. Where a person with a disability, Allah Ta'ala knows what Allah Ta'ala made the child be disabled. There's a special poem, in fact, that the people with disabilities have. And they say, heaven's special gift. Where Allah Ta'ala chooses, you are chosen to be the parents of that child. A beautiful poem. I shared it with some people in Baghdad, and they put it in the newspaper. We have now to work beyond our borders. But we are sitting with such an influx of people on this continent coming into South Africa, and the diverse versions of Islam that we're having to deal with is sometimes, can we manage this without being judgmental? Is frightening.
Sharmila, from your side?
Yeah, look, I think also the strength that we draw, even in the Muslim Students Association at that time, I was still at school then, long time ago, was from the strength from the Quran. And even in the Call of Islam, even up till today, we take particular verses and then we draw the knowledge out of when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks to us through those verses and giving us guidance. And that is what actually happened. But also taking from the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and that is how we became strong. Our hearts became strong. And, for us as women also, it wasn't easy. We had many comrades that were arrested and tortured and all of this. And some of them are no longer with us today. And you remember their families. And then we had also lost Muslims in the process that left because their communities condemned them that they were participating in kuffar politics.
Sure.
And we had to, some of us, and we don't take credit because only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives hidayah, but with the help of other brothers and sisters, bringing them back slowly and all of that, and the support that has been provided. So that is where we came from, and it was from the strong foundation also that our parents, they might not have been freedom fighters or activists, But they knew that it was wrong, and the foundation that they set for us and the examples that they set for us, because in the Western Cape, in Cape Town, our parents used to talk about Sissy Gaul and all the others. Our karamats, our mazars that's there, they were freedom fighters, and they would relate that history to us. And therefore, as a Muslim, our foundation was very strong. But also, your conscience and your heart, your ruh, tells you that this is not correct, and you have to do something. And yes, a lot of communities and there was a lot of people today that are sheikhs that were part of this. And if you would allow me to mention a few, Sheikh Siraj Hendricks, we had of the Azavia in Cape Town, we had a good conversation about his activism in the MSA and the Call of Islam. And many others, from the MJC, Sheikh Nazim and all of that, provided the support. And it brings back a memory. And I actually, while I was doing the research for this, I pulled out some documents from the Muslim Students Association's 7th AGM that was held in the Western Cape in 1979. At the Masjid al-Salam in where Sheikh Deen was the masjid. And I remember clearly they came from Durban, Johannesburg, all over the country, and it was university students with high school students, and I was a high school student at the time. And we were sitting in the masjid, and I remember clearly, and all we just heard was this burst of fire and tear gas coming into the masjid. And and all Sheikh Deen said was that, put your trust in the Almighty. That's all you can do. Put your trust in the Almighty, and the older students from university protect your younger brothers and sisters.
Sure.
And this is what we had to go through. But at the end of the day, what Islam teaches us is that if you don't forgive the next person, Allah won't forgive you.
And it's these type of attributes that really pulls us through as Muslims. I mean, sitting and listening to your stories as having grown up as a white Afrikaner in this country, I mean, it's shocking for me to sit and hear this because I was never exposed to it. And I think there are many other people like me, when they have to hear this for the first time, you are taken aback. You become speechless because how could they? How could our forefathers do this to another human being? It is very, very heart-rending. On that note, it is time for us once again to go to an ad break. Don't go away. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. A warm welcome back to Muslima Insight. Before the break, Sister Shamila, you were relating to us a very heartrending story of how shots went off and tear gas was thrown into a masjid. And I mean, if I just have to place myself and my children in a situation like that, what fear goes through the minds and the hearts and the souls of those children and of yourself? Coming back to what we are discussing, can you relate for us what are the mindsets of people still today due to the effect of apartheid on this social disorganization that we find?
Look, I've done some reading up on the subject and some research, because there's lots of violence in our communities today.
Absolutely.
And not only violence in the sense of robberies and house break-ins, but also violence, abuse in the family, sibling upon sibling and partners against partners. And what the research actually indicated was that, I think it was done by Rock, that because of the effects of apartheid had, when people were then sent into, or the families were disintegrated and there was, a migrant labor and families were broken apart. Some were sent very far out of town or wherever they were broken up and sent to. It had effects on the family, but also on the community at large. and the violence that they saw in their communities. Because what also came out of apartheid, and which was, I don't know when those files will be opened, but the apartheid government used drugs and alcohol to undermine our families and to undermine communities. And they were the ones supplying it and making it available in our communities to subdue the uprising, to get children hooked onto these things. And that caused a lot of violence, gang violence and all of these things. And the effects is that growing up in a violent society, your child then knows nothing better.
Because that's the conditioning. That's what they're used to. That's what they see life as.
And if they see the mother hitting the father, or the father hitting the mother, they think it's a norm. So the violence, it was not all political, it was societal as well.
But it was the effect of what the parents lived through.
Exactly, because it's also sometimes how many times out of frustration don't you feel like smacking your youngster, you know? And that is sometimes out of frustration, you know. People, we had no other way, or communities had no other way to express their anger.
It's almost like a sense of helplessness and hopelessness, that there isn't, the help is not coming, there isn't a resolve. And it's also the sense of disowning who Allah Ta'ala made you as. You know, that worthiness, that sense of dignity that Auntie Bibi mentioned earlier. People were robbed of that. So it stands to reason why a person will become violent and frustrated, because there's disowned parts.
Exactly, because if you keep on telling a child you're naughty, the child will then believe all the time. So as communities, we were told that we're not bright enough, you're not worthy enough, you're less a person, you're not a human being. And all of these things.
But it was very selective, even in our own community, Shamila. It was based on the colour of your pigmentation. And therefore, if you were fairer, there was a different way you were treated. Families within themselves adopted that stance as well. You know, and we must acknowledge that. We can blame everything on the state and apartheid, but when people took ownership and made apartheid work for them, so that it was working for them in corrupting society. Businesses, you name it, you can across the board name people who you knew benefited from the previous regime. They had access to the, what was it called, union buildings, not White House, I almost said White House, but they had access to parliament and things like that. That's why the tricameral, when the real uprising re-emerged, because of the tricam elections. You saw youngsters being beaten in front of you, boots stamped on them and things like that. You saw atrocities that you don't even want to remember, because it affects your psyche, and then you become angry, and that's not the response we need today. It means we have to have level minds to say, how do we move forward? How do we heal? And that's where Sawid as a platform, when we had it in 2003, we were shocked. We were absolutely shocked when the Afrikaner women came and told us what they had undergone. It was a diverse community in Sawid coming together in 2003 in those army tents. And we started sharing, because we said we needed to build onto healing. And when those women told us what they had gone through, and what they had experienced. And African women, all women started sharing, and we said, oh, it's so beautiful. Now we can see one another as woman to woman. We can talk to one another and not look at your race or your religion, and talk to one another, women, because that's what Sawid is. We do dialogue, irrespective of what level you come from, you engage, And through that, hopefully, inshallah, we will have a better understanding of one another's pain. Some of us can be very open and express our pain very easily. Others of us are still very much, it's like, people were about cancer. You didn't share it because it was, it's skaamte, So it's not to share, because our sisters are still being beaten up. And it's got nothing to do with apartheid, because it comes from...
Those are the effects that is left behind.
But is it the effect, or is it us as Muslims that do not go to Quran and say that we use Quran selectively sometimes,
I think for me it's a combination of the conditioning that came from apartheid, all the disowned parts of a person's being, and the lack of following true guidance. Because we've got the Quran, we've got the Sunnah, but healing needs to take place.
I think what we didn't deal with as Muslims, we tried it with the Muslim convention that we had when we were trying to say, how do we engage with the apartheid regime as Muslims after all that had been done? So there was the conference that was held in Cape Town. And in that conference, it was amazing what was taking place during that process, you know. We had some brothers standing up and saying, we're too small a community to make an impact, and all that. But we dealt with it from Quran. We dealt with it from the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. We used the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, what had happened, how and what was the instruction, and therefore on that basis entered into the negotiating process. Because many of us felt, Nieman, jy het verkeerd gemaak, you know, I don't turn the other cheek, you know. In that process, we need to also, therefore, as Muslims, engage and let's be honest with one another. People are hiding behind what they had done in the apartheid regime and misused their position as Muslims, having access to the previous regime and influencing things. We need to deal with that, Shamila, so that we could overcome that hurt as well. Because some of us still try to deal with it, but ons is nog bietjie kwaad. Because they did it in the name of Islam. And it was wrong.
It is wrong. Absolutely.
I agree, Auntie Bibi. I think that we're only human. Even though as much as we say that you have to lighten your ruh, you have to forgive. But at the end of the day, you still have a little bit of anger. People deal differently with the anger. But for us, we are part of this country. We are a nation. And we are Muslim. Some of us by birth, others, you know, by embracing Islam and coming into the deen. But at the end of the day, like I said in the beginning, we all a creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Every living organism on this dunya is a creation of the Almighty. And therefore, you know, what Auntie Bibi had said, yes, there is people that benefited from those days. But we need to deal with that. But we have to be honest with ourselves. Also, within our own communities, we have our own prejudices. So how can we build a nation when within our own communities, within our own families, there is still these differences. And that we cannot blame on apartheid.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a sense of personal responsibility where people need to stand in the mirror and say, I am responsible for X, Y, and Z. And if the person needs to be apologetic or come and ask for forgiveness, let that be so. Let us start to build bridges so that the forgiveness process becomes easier. I want to ask you, because we are in the last segment, to quickly touch for us on, you touched earlier on the principles of social cohesion. Can you just elaborate for us?
I'm just going to do it briefly, and it's a document that was done when discussions were going on with regards to how we're going to build a nation and social cohesion. And what it says here is, and I'm going to read it to you, and it says, nation building in the sense and in the context of South Africa cannot be perpetuated of the hierarchies of the past based on pre-given or ethnical, engineered and imposed divisions of people rooted in prejudice, discrimination and exclusion. So what this basically says, and if you look at the Islamic context of what it is that you have a prejudice, that you discriminate, that is your ego, right? That is your nafs. So as individuals, it starts with us. We have to deal with our nafs first, with our egos, to think, I'm better than you. And you know, and that is when we can start building. But it starts within your own home, within your own families. And you go and you look at families today. Brother and sister, uncle and niece and nephew and whoever is, I'm better than you because I'm accumulating. The mindset now is we're free, okay? We're free, we can do business. And We can accumulate as much as we want, but I don't want the same for my brother and my sister.
It's almost like a competitive kind of a outlook.
So how can you build a cohesive society when you can't build a cohesive family? And it is the mindset, it is the nafs. As much as we say that we follow Quran and Sunnah, we talk about, and we wear the dress, the outer, but we don't wear the inner.
What's going on the inside?
We don't wear the inner. And then we ask and we say, but why does my domestic helper rob me of my jewelry? Why does the person that comes and does my garden, steal my scissors or something like that? Because I don't have heart. That person is suffering. Okay? I don't treat him like a human being. I don't see him as a human being. I see him as a lesser human being. So how can you build that person love you and love your deen?
It's a concept of Ubuntu.
Exactly.
In other words.
I just quickly want to say this. The people talk about the first sin or the original sin and the tree and the apple and the story. For me, it's Habil Kabil. It's about two brothers and what was done in that time. So we need to look at it from that point of view so that we can move past it and inshallah heal, because to divide is easier than to unite. And the uniting is the social cohesion. Uniting, everybody across the board, in your street, in your neighborhood, not being selective.
And I think it touches for me a lot on the overcoming of the ego, because the greatest struggle in the way of Allah is mastery over the self. And I mean, it cuts for me both ways. As much as we talk about the accumulation of wealth, on the one hand, is for the wrong reasons. The wealth is the responsibility in having that wealth is not lived up to for many. There's also the inferiority complex that others are sitting with, and all of that needs to sort of come together for us. In my humble view, that we need to move forward. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. What I would, in my conclusion, like to say is, I think we all need to be able to label what it is that we are feeling, what apartheid has done to us. We need to be able to have a platform where we can express the hurt, the anger. All these issues needs to be voiced. It needs to be validated and heard. And I think we need to come to a place of acceptance. We were chosen for this. Because once you have released all this emotional build up, is you can come to that place of saying, I accept, this is my purpose, this is what Allah Ta'ala has chosen for me. And then to take from there, what do I still need to do about it? How can we now learn from this? And that is for me the message that you have brought to our viewers, to myself here today. And I thank you once again for being with us today. Thank you, Auntie Bibi. If there's any closing statements you would like to share with us.
One last thing for me is that we were created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to serve Him. And if we serve the Creator, we serve humanity. So I would like to close with that. Shukran.
I thank you. Jazakallah khair. I thank you so much. Once again, we have come to the end of today's program. From myself, Adila, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.